So many years ago, while I was researching my dissertation, I did a lot of work in county court records in Kentucky, in 18th century Kentucky. And one day when I was in the archives, I found this box of county court cases. And this box wasn't supposed to exist at all. This county court was supposed to have gone up in flames in 1803, and so I thought there was nothing left. But I found this one box. And so I pulled it, looking through cases, and I found this file. It was a case unlike any I'd ever seen. I'd heard of these kinds of cases before, but I'd never actually seen one in person. It was a freedom suit involving a family of enslaved people who sued for freedom, claiming indigenous ancestry. This woman was an Appalachian woman who'd been born in the Spanish missions of Florida and captured by the English in 1704 and sold into slavery. And I thought this was interesting. I pulled it and copied it and set it aside. Many years later, after the dissertation was done, for some reason I pulled it out. I wanted to see if there was anything I could make of this case. And so I started looking at it, started reading about freedom suits, about race and memory and indigeneity, and I put together this paper that sounded very smart. I used a lot of very smart words, and I gave this paper to a very distinguished audience at Yale, and felt very good about myself. At the end of this paper, at the end of my talk, a very senior scholar raised her hand and asked me a simple question: who were these people? And I froze, because I had no answer to this obvious question. I hadn't found anything in the records to tell me who these people were, and because nothing was written down, I'd sort of forgotten to ask. Ever since that moment, I've been trying to answer that question. I'm now writing a book that tries to answer that very simple question: who were these people? And it's not an easy question to answer, because there really is very little that points me in the right direction in the archives. I started by teasing out the little threads of what I did know. I started working with the name of their enslaved ancestor, Judith, and trying to track her down anywhere I could throughout the archives. What I've uncovered in over a decade of research, through slow, methodical plodding through the records, is more than a story about just one family. It's a story about a vast network of related people who sued generation after generation after generation for over half a century. Their story spans from Florida to South Carolina to Virginia to Kentucky to Tennessee, through colonial New Spain to the British colonies, through the American Revolution and into the early American Republic. Collectively, they pursued freedom in courts again and again and again. But more than just telling a story about freedom suits, I'm also trying to tell a story about archives. There's a reason why it has been so difficult to excavate their stories from existing records. Trying to tell the stories about enslaved people is somewhat like trying to put together a puzzle when many, if not most, of the pieces are missing or lost. Enslaved people often appear in the archives as partial figures. Their lives, their families, their personal connections, their daily experiences are obscured behind layers of colonial experience. The fact that they're so hard to find in existing records says as much about what we value historically as it does about who these people actually were. Trying to piece together their lives has been an enormous challenge. And it's a challenge for historians to try to write this kind of history. But at the same time, there are enormous opportunities. Knowing that generations after generations of people created their own personal archives, their own personal networks, preserved their own family relationships, is a story that it is in and of itself worth telling. So where I enter into this project is to honor that history, to honor that experience, and to respect and restore those connections, and to ultimately remind us that these lives mattered.